Hi, I'm Lulu Friesdat. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Smart Elections, and you can find us on the web at smartelections.us. I'm going to tell you a little bit today about our background and about a lawsuit that we filed in Rockland County, New York that's gotten a fair amount of attention, and that is probably one of the things that you're wanting to hear about. So I'm going to do a few things first. I'm going to give you a visual description of myself. That's for people who have visual impairments. So I am a very pale woman who spends too much time at her computer. I have long brown hair with kind of choppy bangs. I'm next to a brick wall, and there's a vase of flowers behind me, dried flowers, eucalyptus. And I will just say that's for our friends who like to have everybody included, and for our friends who like things more neutral and feel that that's too woke. I will just say this: we are nonpartisan. We really try to be fair to everybody. We are not interested in the politics of any given situation. We are interested in elections being fair. And that is really our mandate. We advocate for fair, secure, accurate, accessible, and transparent elections that can be publicly verifiable. And we've been in existence for about 5 years. I'll give you a little bit of background about me. I'm an election security journalist, and I started covering this issue long before it was a hot button topic. I was a documentary filmmaker, actually worked in network news for about 20 years, and I filmed the first known hack of a US voting machine as part of my documentary in 2007. And at that time, it was very eye-opening. It was by a grad student at Princeton who has since become one of the most world famous hackers, white hat hackers in the world, Alex Halderman. At the time, he was a grad student at Princeton, and I went there and I filmed this experiment that they had done, and they had hacked a US voting machine, and it was chilling. And so this became really my main priority, a bit of an obsession even, and I was extremely concerned about what could be happening with voting machines across the country. I actually filmed investigations that got over 4 million views through different media outlets. And then at a certain point, I felt that that really wasn't changing anything. And so I went into advocacy. I felt it's not just enough to tell people about it. I really need to start to work to make these changes. And so with two colleagues, we formed Smart Elections around 2019. And since that time, we've done quite a few things, but the 2024 election was a watershed moment and people became much more aware of this issue. So now we've really ramped up our efforts. I'm here to talk to you about some of those efforts. In particular, I think most people are really interested in hearing about this lawsuit that we filed. We filed this lawsuit through our action arm, Smart Legislation. Smart Legislation is the action arm of Smart Elections, and we were one of the plaintiffs and now have become the lead plaintiff in this lawsuit in Rockland County, New York. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, about why we filed it, and about the data behind it. I'm going to show you some graphs and some charts that hopefully are going to make that a little bit easier to follow. There has been a fair amount of information out about this. Some of it has been accurate, some of it has been less accurate. We really strive for 100% accuracy. As far as we know, to the best of our ability, we bring you the facts as we are aware of them. And if there are things that have been reported about this that aren't accurate, I will try to sort of touch base on those as we go. But the best place to get accurate information about the work that we are doing is from us. So go to our website, smartelections.us. Please do sign up for our Substack and our mailing list. Our Substack especially is where we put a lot of really important information. We'd love to have you follow the Substack. If you have the resources, please do become a paid subscriber. It does help. And I am just going to take a moment to ask you to also make a donation. Donations are tax deductible. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and it actually makes a huge difference. Right now, we are in the process of trying to raise $100,000 for this lawsuit. We are a small nonprofit, and that is a big, heavy lift for us. But luckily, things are going pretty well. We have a fundraiser underway, and in the past 20 days, we have raised over $63,000 toward our goal of $100,000 for our lawsuit. And we are just immensely grateful to people who have donated and who are supporting this work. All donations are tax deductible. And so if you haven't donated yet and would like to donate, I'm just going to show you how. It's tremendously easy. You just go to our website, which is smartelections.us, and you're going to go to the drop-down menu and click on Donate, and that should take you over to a window that is our PayPal site. And there you can donate, really, I would say in a matter of about 60 seconds, you should be able to make a donation. And we are immensely grateful. And one of the best things you can do if you've already donated is just to keep spreading the word and letting people know about our work and about the urgency of our work. And so hopefully we will reach our goal of $100,000. We're on our way, and we're very, very grateful to you. Thank you for that. I'm going to just keep mentioning that throughout this recording, because I know sometimes people only watch for a few minutes, or they watch a few minutes later on. So I'm just going to keep mentioning that the donations are really one of the most critical ways that you can support our work right now, because without that money, the lawsuit really isn't viable. We've got to pay our attorney in order for the lawsuit to proceed. Okay, so let's talk about the lawsuit and about kind of things that preceded the lawsuit. I want to talk to you a little bit about our work analyzing what we call drop-off in the 2024 election. Now, we weren't the first ones that noticed the drop-off. It was actually first brought to our attention by a security expert named Stephen Spoonamore. And what Stephen Spoonamore put forward didn't actually turn out to be exactly correct, but there was some accuracy to his overall assessment. And his overall assessment was that, in general, President Trump was far outperforming the down ballot Republican races, like the races for Senate, Attorney General, Governor. He was getting a lot more votes than the Republican counterparts. And the Democratic candidate, Kamala Harris, was getting far fewer votes than the Democratic down ballot candidates, the Democratic Senate candidates, Attorney General, Governor. And that is unusual. In general, if you look back at research, say from the 2020 election, what we call the drop-off rate, and I think Smart Elections was the one that coined that term. We just tried to think of something that was a little bit descriptive. That drop-off rate in past elections was around 1% to 2%. So to see these drop-off rates go up as high as 10 and 20% was really remarkable. It was unusual. And so what we did was we put a data team together, and we started to analyze many different states. And we actually looked at 17 states. And I'm going to show you some of that work right now. The best way to find it is on our website. So then when you're on the website, you're going to go to More and look for 2024 election drop-off. So when you get to drop-off, this page has a lot of our work there. This was our early work about the drop-off. And there's bar charts there that show you kind of the extreme nature of the drop-off. These are comparisons of the swing versus the non-swing states. The drop-off numbers were much, much higher in the swing states than the non-swing states. And the easiest way to see how extreme it was is to look at the percentages. We analyzed it both by the number of votes, like the raw number of votes, and also by the percentage of votes. And if you look at the percentages, this is a percentage right here when you see this 5.58%. That's the Republican overperformance, and this 1.48% is the Democratic underperformance. And when I say overperformance and underperformance, I mean in comparison to the down ballot races. This is almost 6%. Almost 6% of Trump's vote was above the down ballot Republican race that we looked at. In general, it was the Senate. So generally speaking, almost 6% of his total was more than the Republican Senate candidate. This is in the swing states. And in the swing states, Kamala Harris, about 1.5% of her total is less than the Democratic Senate candidate, or sometimes it was the Attorney General, sometimes the governor. And if you look at the non-swing states, you'll see that it was much closer. Both of the presidential candidates in the non-swing states in general, these are averages, they're percentages, were getting votes a little bit above the Senate or the Attorney General or the governor's race. And that's more typical. You generally see a president getting a few more votes than, say, the Senate candidate of the same party. This was quite atypical, quite unusual. We have this really well organized for you. There's an index of states, and so you can actually go, just click on that, and it'll take you to a list, and each of these is a hyperlink. So say that you wanted to look at the Montana drop-off data. The Montana drop-off data is quite remarkable. If you look at it by number of votes or by percentage, Kamala Harris was almost 20% below the Democratic Senate candidate, and President Trump was almost 10% above. And again, what these percentages are, it is the percentage of their vote. We got these numbers by dividing the drop off. The drop off is the president's vote minus the down ballot race. And then we divided it by the number of presidential votes for each political party. And we did that for a very distinct reason, because we wanted to see what percentage of her vote might be missing, or what percentage of his vote might be somehow added, somehow an addition. So about 10% of his total vote looks like a potential overperformance. It looks like about 20% of her vote here in Montana could be missing. So that's how to read those numbers. And then if you want to get more specific and you want to actually see the data, and I'm going to go to New York now because New York is where we filed a lawsuit. So I'm going to go back to the index and I'm go to New York. And then underneath each bar chart, you can see that the drop off is very extreme in New York also. You could see that Kamala Harris, about 2% of her vote is below the Senate, the Democratic Senate, and almost 10% of Trump's vote is above the Republican Senate candidate. Then if you want to see the details, you click that link underneath the bar chart, and that takes you to our charts. And our charts are all public, and we want people to be able to see this data. We're very meticulous about our data. We have 2 separate independent members of the data team download the data from a website. We try to get a very reliable website, either the actual state or county website, or these numbers initially were pulled from another website called uselectionatlas.org, which was recommended to us by experts as a reliable data site. And then in all of the data tabs, actually, there's always a source tab that gives you the link to where the data is from. It gives you the initials of the team member that downloaded it with the date and time of the download. And then it also gives you the actual numbers that we use, the presidential data, the Senate data, and then the drop off and how we did those comparisons. All of our data is totally transparent and very reliable. We are meticulous. When we do the analysis, we also have 2 separate team members do the analysis independently, not speaking to each other. However, they feel it's best to do it. And then we have a quality assurance person look at the numbers and see if they come out exactly the same. And that's our assurance that the data is in fact accurate. So we're extremely meticulous about it. In New York, as I showed you on the bar chart, the drop off was large. And you can see the numbers up here. The Republican overperformance at about 9% of Trump's vote, and the Democratic underperformance, about 2% of her totals were under the Democratic Senate candidate. And one of the most extreme examples was Rockland County. Rockland County, actually, Trump had a 23% overperformance, and Kamala Harris, 9% of her vote is below the Democratic Senate candidate, Kirsten Gillibrand. This is some of the most extreme in the state. And then it turned out that there was some other information that was very interesting about Rockland County. And this is really why we filed the lawsuit in Rockland County. We filed the case in Rockland County asking for a full hand recount of the New York Senate race and the presidential race. And when we say the Senate race, we mean the U.S. Senate race in New York and the presidential race. So I've already showed you some of the really odd numbers in regard to the presidential race. What we looked at in the Senate race was an independent candidate named Diane Sare. And Diane Sare actually collected affidavits that showed that she got more votes than the Board of Elections counted for her. And I'll show you some of that information now. This was the press release that we put out when the lawsuit actually went into discovery. We didn't file a press release when we first filed the lawsuit. We wanted to just see it if it went anywhere. But when we actually moved forward into discovery, we felt like we've got some legs here and we want people to know about it. And we did get quite a bit of traction with it. It ran on the AP wires, and it initially got 121 million potential reach, I guess, people who might have come in contact with the information. But what was really interesting about it is that as the days went on, it just exploded. So it got initially, I think, 500 clicks, but then after 5 days, it had 43,000. And I've never seen a press release do that. In our experience, you put it out, and then after a few days, people kind of stop paying attention to it. But this really exploded, and it actually was covered by Newsweek. So we've been featured in Newsweek, I think, 5 different times now. 2 of the most hefty articles were about the lawsuit, if you want to find these articles, they are on our website. So you can go to our website and just look under more featured in the news, and we have the articles there. So this is the one where Newsweek actually talked about the lawsuit that was moving forward. They actually took in Newsweek one of my quotes where I said, there is clear evidence that the Senate results are incorrect, and there are statistical indications that the presidential results are highly unlikely. So this is what I'm going to talk to you about in a minute now, is this clear evidence that the Senate results are incorrect. And then why don't we look at that, and then we'll come back to this bite. So this is information that Diane Sare, an independent candidate, put together. And we know Diane Sare actually because she helped us with an election protection program that we run. One of the things that we feel most strongly about is that there needs to be election protection across the country. So we've actually started an election protection program. It was one of the first things we started in 2021, and we've actually run 5 separate pilot programs of election protection where we actually do a much more comprehensive job than really any other organization I've seen. We train people how to go into the polling place. They collect data, the number of voters who have voted, the number of ballots that have been scanned. We teach them how to take photographs of poll tapes to check whether or not the seals are on the machines. We teach them how to wait and see who picks up the ballots, what the chain of custody is, what the accessibility of the site is. It's a very comprehensive program that we've developed. And Diane Sare helped us with that because in New York, you need a certificate in order to be able to do this work. Each poll watcher has to have a certificate. And Diane Sare and her party provided us with those certificates in the 2024 election. And so we worked with her, and we had a good relationship with her. She's an honest person, and we found her to be reliable. And so when she found this information that more people had voted for her than the board recorded, we were quite concerned. And so along with her, we did file the lawsuit. She has since pulled out of the lawsuit. We are concerned that possibly she was intimidated, and there were reasons for that. But nevertheless, the lawsuit is proceeding forward because we are the lead plaintiffs now. So I just want to show you a little bit about the Diane Sare data and be extremely clear, because there is a lot of confusion about this. The affidavits that we have are the affidavits in the Senate race. They're the affidavits that Diane Sare collected, that she got more votes. The concerns about the presidential race are more based on statistical analysis and also another anomaly that I'll show you that a lot of people have talked about, the 0 vote districts. Let's start with Diane Sare. We were talking about the press release, and we did get a huge influx of visitors. And I will just keep saying, if you want to make a donation, please do donate for us by going to our website. We've had almost 250,000 visitors now. And if each visitor does make a small donation while you're there, we will make our goal of $100,000. So please, please do donate. I'm going to just continue to remind people throughout the show that we do very much welcome your donations, and we need them in order to continue this work. So let's talk about Diane Sare. Diane Sare collected affidavits showing that she received more votes than what was reported for her. And these seem like small numbers, but if you look at the percentages, they really matter. So she collected in her own district where she lives 7 people who signed sworn affidavits that they voted for her on election day. And then the board acknowledged that 2 people voted for her during early voting. The way you read these charts is that her affidavits are this light aqua color, and then the Board of Elections votes for her are the rose colored, and then the total Board of Elections are the deeper red brick color, and the total votes that she should have had is this dark turquoise color. 7 people said they voted for her on election day. The Board of Elections acknowledged she had 2 votes during early voting. That's 7 and 2, that's 9. There should have been 9 votes for her in this particular district where she actually lives, Ramapo, District 39. Then what the board said was that there were only 5 votes for her in Ramapo 39. That's almost a 50% drop from what she has sworn affidavits of. That's big. If you multiply that out across the county, that's big. So then she also went to another district. She went to 62, which is another district near where she lives, I believe. And here she had a sworn voter on election day. She had 3 sworn voters who swore they voted for her during early voting. So that's 4. You see the light rose color? That's the board's vote for her. They acknowledge she had 1 mail-in vote. So that's 1 plus 3 is 4 plus 1 is 5. She should have a minimum of 5 votes in Ramapo 62. However, the board reported 3 votes for her. Again, almost 50% of her votes are missing. That's a lot. Think about the percentages if you just magnify that out across the county. And the other thing to keep in mind is that it's highly unlikely that only one race is wrong. If the results are wrong in one race, why would the results be wrong for one independent candidate in the Senate race? There's only a couple explanations for this. So one explanation is that the machines are malfunctioning. If the machines are malfunctioning, they're not just malfunctioning in one race. If the machines are malfunctioning, they're probably malfunctioning in multiple races, and we really need to get in there and count the ballots by hand and see what happened. The other possibility is that there's some type of foul play going on. If there's some sort of foul play, then you have to wonder why, right? Nobody's going to mess around with 3 votes in District 62 just because they don't want Diane Sare to have 5 votes in District 62. That doesn't make any sense. If they're moving third-party votes around, they're moving third-party votes around because they're trying to put them somewhere else or take them away from someone, right? They're trying to make someone else's votes less because they might be taking votes from a candidate that they don't want to win and sort of putting them into a third-party candidate. In that case, sometimes you see a third-party candidate's votes unnaturally go up, or they might be needing extra votes, and so they're sort of siphoning off votes from a third-party candidate to make someone else's votes larger. Which party is doing that? We don't know. As we've said, we're nonpartisan. We're just looking at the data. And the data is pretty clear that something is wrong here. And that is why we have requested a full hand recount. And the judge has so far said that a full hand recount is moving forward. And I want to be clear about this because there's been a little bit of misinformation about this. We are not guaranteed a hand recount. We have requested a hand recount. We are the plaintiff, and that is our request. It is in the petition called Prayer for Relief. We have asked for a full hand recount, and the judge has said that that remains on the table as long as the lawsuit moves forward. That is its ultimate destination. However, believe me, the Board of Elections of Rockland County is fighting it tooth and nail. Again, that's why we need your donations, because they are trying to dismiss the case. We have to fight off a dismissal, and after that, we're going to have to persuade the judge that the hand recount is really necessary. And so that may require a whole nother set of legal arguments. And those arguments are costly. But in the meantime, what's really amazing, what's fantastic, is that the judge has allowed discovery to move forward. And so even while the Rockland County Board of Elections is filing their motion for dismissal, we have put together our list for discovery. And it's very detailed. There's a lot of things that we'd like to see from the Rockland County Board of Elections. We're allowed to ask for quite a few things. And we also, in the meantime, have spent months just poring over security documents and researching different possible paths for there to be error. And we've done a great deal of research on it, which we are going to be bringing to you. And we've put that information together into a set of requests of information that we want to see from the Rockland County Board of Elections. And that's our discovery that's moving forward. So that's what's happening in Rockland County. And if you go back to the article, that was in Newsweek, you can see they took my quote there. If the results are incorrect, it is a violation of the constitutional rights of each person who voted in the 2024 Rockland County general election. The best way to determine if the results are correct is to examine the paper ballots in a full, public, transparent hand recount of all presidential and Senate ballots in Rockland County. We believe it's vitally important, especially in the current environment, to be absolutely confident about the results of the election. So this is all in Newsweek, which is fantastic. And then Newsweek did another article which refers back to research that we did. As I told you, we're doing a tremendous amount of research. In February, we went public with this information about this testing lab called ProVNV. And there's been a tremendous amount of information about this now, but please do go to our Substack, and you can find our Substack if you go to the website on our homepage. There's quite a few different links there. And if you go down and look, one of the first ones is subscribe to our Substack. So go ahead and do subscribe to our Substack because we put a lot of important information there. So this information we put out in February. And what it is research about this testing lab. The testing lab is called ProVNV. They are one of 2 testing labs in the United States that tests and approves voting machines and voting machine software and firmware updates. And they actually seem to do the heavy lifting. They actually are doing more of the testing than the second lab, which is called SLI. And what we noticed in February was that their website was literally just disintegrating. This was on the front page of their website. It looked like a 13-year-old had hacked the website. It said, "Hello world, welcome to WordPress. This is your first post. Edit or delete it, then start writing." And it was like this for days. And then I actually started clicking around on their website before this happened. And what I noticed was almost all of their pages were error messages. There weren't even any pages there. And then we went back into the Internet Archive and we saw that their website had been malfunctioning since as far back as July. You can see this was a screenshot that I took that showed in July of 2024, it was just an error message on their front page. Their website was literally disintegrating from July of 2024 through February of 2025. And this is the company that approves the software and firmware updates for our voting machines, or many of our voting machines. As I said, there is a second testing lab. Now, some of the information that came out about this said these tests were done in secret and no one knew. That's not accurate. It's a testing lab and there is a protocol for the tests. So the tests are approved by the Election Assistance Commission, and each one of the software updates gets a certificate. These are the certificates for each one of the software updates. One of the things, though, that you can tell about their certificates that's really fascinating is you can see how many voting machines actually got updated with these, and it's a lot. If you look at the Dominion, it's all the versions from 5.5 all the way up to 5.19. Those are most of the Dominion voting machines in operation. And then if you look at some of the others, these were the original updates that we found. We found 4. There were 2 for Dominion and 2 for ES&S, and the ES&S ones were equally wide. You can see these are all the different ES&S versions, the 6.0, 6.0, 2.0, 2.1, all the way up to 6.4. These are many of the ES&S versions in use. So those software updates were going to many of the voting machines. And our concern here is that if this is a company that is not being meticulous and careful with its website, is it possible that they're not being meticulous and careful with the security of the software updates? A software update is an easy way to put malware into equipment. It is a classic hack. This was something that was done, for example, with the Asus laptops. 500,000 Asus laptops got malware in them because the Asus company was hacked, and then the malware was put into the official Asus update, and that is how the malware just effortlessly went into all of the laptops through the official updates. So this is a very risky situation where you have this company that doesn't seem to be following good protocols with its website and potentially isn't following good protocols with the rest of its operations. And this was something that we alerted the public to in February. And then I think after the lawsuit came back, people started sort of going back through all of our information, and they found this and they just took it and ran with it, which is great. It's great for people to know about this. These are really important things, and the protocols around these testing labs are not what they really need to be. And the Election Assistance Commission itself is not what it needs to be. It's really a toothless agency in many ways. It has very little enforcement capability. It wasn't set up as a real enforcer. It was set up as a guiding agency. The requirements for the voting machines, they're not requirements. They're called voluntary voting system guidelines. It's voluntary for the states to comply or not comply with the suggestions from the Election Assistance Commission. So the whole thing is really problematic. But I just want to be clear. Again, we're always interested in accuracy. I want to be clear. This wasn't a secret software update. There's nothing secret about it. There were official approvals. There were technicians that signed off at the Election Assistance Commission for each one of these updates. Some of the updates were somewhat serious. In particular, we found one that has to do with whether or not the machine alerts you to the software that's running in it being the original software. They changed what's called an INI file, and it's a file that determines whether or not the machine gives you an alert that the software is correct or incorrect. And the circumstances under which you get that alert got changed twice, not once, but twice. So that INI change we thought was not what was called de minimis. That's the term they use for the minor updates. We didn't believe that that should have been de minimis. That one in particular, we really wish had required a much more robust approval process. So that's the ProVMV updates. Again, if you want to get the accurate information, we really encourage you to go to our Substack and read our post on that. And then we also did a second post on that. And the second post really went into more detail about it. The second post has this very bold headline that Kamala Harris won the US election. That was not our headline. We just wanted to point out this was a headline that was running in different websites around the country. And what we do in that particular Substack is we go through and we point out what was accurate and what was inaccurate about those different articles. People kind of lost their minds over this. This was an MSN headline, but we went through and we said it's a mix of fact and fiction, because some of the things that were circulating were not in fact true. But one of the things that we did give you in that particular Substack, if you go and look at that one, is we put together all of the updates that we could find to the software and the firmware for 2024, all the way up through the election. And we put them into an itemized spreadsheet. So if you go to that Substack and go down toward the bottom of the Substack, you will see where it says, here is a link to the 2024 election technology software updates. That gives you the original ones on the Election Assistance Commission website. And then here we've itemized them in a spreadsheet, and you can actually go yourself if you're kind of a techno nerd like we are, and you can look at each update. You can see the ones in highlight that we were particularly concerned about. You can see which lab did them. You can see that ProVMV did many, many more than the other lab. ProVMV really had the bulk of them, 21 updates from ProVMV, whereas SLI only had a handful. SLI had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then that information was covered in Newsweek. And Newsweek actually took a very important quote from our blog, which I was really glad that they took, because this is how we feel. And we said, why would we trust a company that has let its website disintegrate publicly for over 6 months? Why would we trust them to test complex electronic equipment that we rely on to determine who controls the Treasury, the military, and the policy of our entire nation? We should not. We do not. We do not trust these voting machines. We do not trust the labs that test them. We demand that this facade of security be replaced with something meaningful, a trustworthy system that protects each vote and ensures that it is counted securely and accurately in a way that can be publicly verified. And again, they ran that in Newsweek, and we were really pleased to see that. We think it's really important that the Overton window, as they say, is shifting, and it's becoming more comfortable for all of us to speak out about these concerns, about our elections, about our technology, and really to make changes. That's what we've been asking for years, not just to talk about it, but actually to make changes and move to a different setup. Because trust me, if you think 2024 was a mess, there is absolutely no guarantee that our elections going forward, that any special elections in 2025, that the 2026 midterms will be more reliable. We are still using the same technology, the same systems, the same protocols, the same labs. Nothing has changed. Just because you've become more aware of the situation, it does not mean that anything has actually changed yet. And so please do get involved. Go to our website, sign up to volunteer. We are putting together election protection all over the country, and we want you to participate. So sign up. I will put up the information for our website, and I will show you where you sign up to volunteer and where you sign up to do election protection. So if you go to the home page and you scroll down, again, you're going to pass our donation page. Please don't just buzz by it. Please, please, please make the donation. We really, really need your help. Make the donation. And then go ahead and scroll down and see how you can get involved. And there's a couple, I already showed you Substack. Sign up to do election protection. That will take you to a Google form that you sign up, and then our state and regional teams will reach out to you and we will get you involved. Whatever state you're in, we are trying to organize each state an election protection team, and that will go all the way down to the county level. You can also volunteer to help us. That is a different Google form. And then after that, you'll get an email from us to get you into our volunteer teams. And check your spam. We respond to that Google form with an email, and it always goes into your spam. So if you sign up to volunteer, the first thing that you want to do is check your spam. Okay, so let's just keep moving here. It's already longer than I had anticipated, but hopefully this is going to be useful to you and answer a lot of questions for you. The next issue that I want to address are the 0 vote districts in Rockland County. So after we filed the lawsuit in Rockland County asking for the full hand recount, we actually got this information from Election Truth Alliance, which is an organization that many of you may be aware of. And they sent us these districts that they found where Kamala Harris had received 0 votes and the Democratic candidate for senator had received quite a large number of votes, 80% in this one district, Ramapo 35. She had received 331 votes. And then this is another one that we highlight, Ramapo 55, Harris got 2 votes and the Democratic candidate for senator got 909. And these are not the only districts. So we actually went through after we got that information from ETA and we put together all of the districts with low votes. So there's actually 4 districts in Ramapo where Harris got 0 votes and the Democratic senator candidate got a decent number, anywhere from 30 up to 331. And then there's others where Harris got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 votes, where the Democratic senator candidate got quite a few, 735, 514, 909. These are big polls for the Democratic senator candidate. Now, what is important to be aware of in Ramapo, and believe me, we are aware of it, there is a large Hasidic community in Ramapo, and they do have a history of what's called block voting. Block voting is where everybody votes the same. And generally they take their tips, we understand, from the rabbi, and the rabbi might very well say, I want everybody to vote for Trump for president, and I want everybody to vote for the Democratic senator candidate, Kirsten Gillibrand. And it might be because Gillibrand has gone in there and developed a deep, relationship with them and made them promises for what they're interested in. So there is a possible explanation, but there's also the possibility that the results are wrong and incorrect, because as we've seen, there's other evidence that the results are incorrect. There's evidence that the Senate results are incorrect. There's statistical indications that the presidential results are incorrect. So it's quite possible that even though there is a somewhat plausible explanation, it's also possible that those results are incorrect. And how would we find out? We would do a full hand recount, right? That's how we would find out. That's how we would know. So much better to do the full hand recount, and then we'll have a better sense and not just be speculating about whether or not these block votes actually created those 0 vote districts. But the one thing that I will show to you that makes me sort of really interested in the hand recount and less likely to say, oh, this is just, this is just block voting and write it off. We did some research. There is a good deal of information that there is block voting in Ramapo. Now, keep in mind that the block voting is in the Hasidic neighborhoods, and the Hasidic neighborhoods are pretty much confined to Ramapo. As far as we can tell, there really are not large Hasidic enclaves outside of Ramapo. So I'm going to walk you through some of the particular statistical irregularities in the other towns. There's 4 other towns that are not Hasidic in Rockland County. But in addition to that, even the Hasidic vote is not always seeming to vote 100% as one mind. So here, for example, is this article that we found from 2022, and I don't know, maybe I can blow it up a little bit bigger. This was from various experts that they interviewed. How those votes could go in the 2 races is unpredictable, complicated by the fragmentation of votes among multiple Hasidic and Orthodox voting groups, particularly in Rockland. In spite of the popular misconception, misconception of a single voting block in both counties, leaders of those groups might endorse different candidates and split the votes. So that's indication that things are not as simple as they might seem. And there's also another expert who's quoted in the article. This is a member of the Jewish community. So this is Yossi Jessner, co-founder of the Orthodox Jewish Public Affairs Council and a Rockland resident. He said that beyond those two distinct voting groups are thousands of other Hasidic and Orthodox voters in Rockland with varying degrees of fidelity to the political endorsements of community leaders. So might vote the way the rabbi tells them to, might not. So again, that's an indication that maybe it's not as simple as, oh, everybody voted exactly how the rabbi told them to. And it, again, is completely worth doing the full hand recount and finding out. Now, one caveat to keep in mind about this full hand recount is that the county has had months with these ballots. This is June and the election was in November. If in fact there is foul play, then they've had plenty of time to cover their tracks, change ballots, make the ballots actually match the results. So we can't be 100% sure that the hand recount is really going to tell us what we want to know. But one thing that we are doing in Discovery is we're going to be looking very carefully at chain of custody to see if the ballots were sealed, to see if there were logs showing that the seals were maintained properly, to see what their lock situation is like, what are their security protocols. We're going to do our best to evaluate whether or not the ballots are reliable. But you always have to be aware that after 6 months, the ballots may not be reliable at this point. So as much as we want the full hand recount, we have to go into it understanding what the circumstances are and not really putting 100% of our faith in that. Nevertheless, we want the full hand recount and we want to see what happens. Now, I'm going to walk you through a little bit of data. I want to show you the statistical analysis that was done by an expert that we're working with. And if we go back to the PDF that we created, I have this slide here, and I'm going to walk you through this. At first, it's going to seem really confusing. It's like a lot of like colors and bubbles and lines, and you're like, I don't know math. I have fear of math. I have math anxiety. I don't know what I'm looking at. Calm down. It's not that complicated, okay? Just going to walk you through it slowly, and it's going to make more sense to you. So do you remember we talked about the drop-off, and we talked about how the drop-off is the difference between the presidential vote and the down ballot vote. In New York, in 2024, it was the Senate as the down ballot. In 2020, it was the congressional race that was the down ballot. Either way, it's a comparison between the top of the ticket and a lower race on the ticket by party on the Republican side and the Democratic side. And what we saw in 2024 was that the Republican presidential candidate, President Trump, way outperformed the Republican senator candidate. And the Democratic presidential candidate was underneath, got less votes than the Democratic senator candidate. And we think that's strange. So one way that we wanted to look at it was, let's compare it to 2020. And that's what we did. And we saw something quite remarkable. And I'm going to show you this. Now, these statistics are not in Ramapo. These are not in the town with the Hasidic communities. The other 4 towns, as far as we know, do not have a large Hasidic presence. These statistics are on the non-Hasidic towns in Ramapo, and they are remarkable. And what it shows us is that the difference in the drop-off on the Democratic side between 2020 and 2024 is highly, highly unlikely. It's very, very different. So the way that you read this, those little red bubbles, those are the drop-off for the Republicans in 2024, and the little blue bubbles are the drop-off for the Democrats in 2024. And you can see the red are mostly up and the blue are mostly down. The 0 line is going to be your down ballot race. The 0 line is the comparison line. If the presidential race is less than the down ballot, then the presidential trend line is going to be below 0. And if the presidential race is above the down ballot, then the trend line is going to be up above 0. So the trend line is basically a line that the program has drawn that tries to show you the average. It shows you sort of exactly what it sounds like. It's a trend line of where the little bubbles are falling. So the solid red line is the 2024 Republican drop-off, and the jagged red line is the 2020 Republican drop-off. The solid blue line is the 2024 drop-off, and the jagged blue line is the 2020 drop-off. And you can see here The Republican drop-off is almost the same in 2020 and 2024. There's almost no difference. The trend lines are almost on top of each other, whereas the 2020 and 2024 drop-off for the Democrats is radically different, radically different. And what you can see is that in both elections, the Republican presidential candidate had more votes than the down ballot Republican race. And that is typical. And if you look at that, it says this is typical. The Trump got more votes than the down ballot Republican candidates. This is typical in 2020 and in 2024. And in 2020, Biden got more votes than the down ballot Democratic candidate, and this is typical. But Harris got fewer votes in 2024 than the down ballot Democratic candidates, and this is not typical. And when you compare these numbers to each other, when you compare the Democratic 2024 drop-off to the 2020 drop-off, you get something called a p-value, and that means the probability value. The p-value is the probability, the likelihood. The lower the p-value, the lower the likelihood, the lower the probability that these numbers are a natural organic result. The p-value in Clarkstown of the 2024 drop-off is 0. It's 0. It's highly unlikely. And that is statistically significant. A p-value of 0 is statistically significant. It means the difference between the Democratic votes in 2020 and 2024 is highly unlikely. And then we did that for town after town. There were 4 other towns in Rockland County outside the Hasidic neighborhoods. Haverstraw, same thing. You see the blue line. That's the 2024 drop-off is way below the 2020 drop-off, which is the blue jagged line. But you see the Republican 2020 and 2024 are so close, you can't even see the difference. The lines are on top of each other. So somehow Harris is getting much fewer votes, but Trump's performance is almost identical. Well, what's happening? Where are her votes going? It doesn't make any sense. How are her votes so much lower if his drop-off is basically the same? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. And again, when you look at it statistically, the p-value is 0, a very low likelihood, highly unlikely that the difference between the 2020 and the 2024 results are a natural organic event. Something seems to have occurred there. And if you go to the other towns, Orangetown, it's the same, p-value of 0. You see again, Harris far below the Biden drop-off. And then on the last town, Stony Point, again, Harris far below the 2020 Biden drop-off. And again, Trump almost the same. Where are her votes going? So this is some of the data that we put together that made us fairly confident that this is a really good location to file a lawsuit. We think that the results here are quite unusual, atypical, something seems to be at play, and we'd like to know what. And there are multiple factors. There is a Senate race where we actually have evidence that the results are incorrect, and then there is a presidential race where we have some highly unlikely results that are showing statistically significant indications that something is wrong. So I hope that that has answered some of your questions about our data, about the lawsuit, about why we're doing all of this. And again, I'm going to encourage you once again to please go to our website and make a donation. We very much need your support. If you made it this far, kudos to you. And thank you very much for your interest in what we're doing. We will let you know what's happening, as things go forward. We're trying to be as in touch with you as possible. And I think it's unknown what could happen. I've seen a lot of reports saying, well, the presidential result has been certified by Congress and nothing can change that. I'm not sure that we've ever had a situation where there was public acknowledgement that the results across the country seem to be inaccurate. And if we actually get into that territory, if we get to the point where there is consensus that the results across the country for any number of races are inaccurate, I don't think we know what could happen. I think it's an unknown, as many things right now are unknown. But I encourage you to stay with us, and I encourage you to support us. We need your support. Thank you so much.